Today I'm having a really cool discussion with someone who's becoming sort of a friend to me. He's been a really good ear over the past few months. I've bothered him and asked him interesting questions about the media landscape. His name is Markovitz. He spent 5 years, the last 5 years, on the SABC board. He's now left that position, and he now heads up the GIBS Media Leadership Think Tank. I try to get that name correct all the time, but I get it wrong. Anyway, Michael, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today? How are you well?
Very good.
I
Very
see
good. Thanks
you
for having me
graying.
on.
You're graying
Yeah.
quite a bit since the SABC. What's going on?
You should have seen what I looked like 5 years ago. No, look, I think the beard is always a revealer of one's age. But no, I think it's been a long 5 years,
Yeah.
but I thankfully have come out the other side feeling good about what we've done and what we tried to do.
Yeah, and for just for public context, I mean, when you arrived at the SABC, just paint a picture for some of those who may not know what had just gone on. There was the Hlaudi Motsoeneng situation just prior to that. There was the dissolution of the board, and you guys were brought in to sort of steady the ship. There was huge financial pressure. Just paint a picture of what you found and what you guys encountered.
Thanks for that. Well, I think, it's 5 years is a long time, and people tend to forget that in 2017, the SABC really was coming off the back of almost like a Zondo commission before the Zondo commission. Things had got so bad under Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng and the board that enabled him, and certain politicians that were enabling him, that the place was really in a terrible state, and Parliament really thought that we need to get involved, and they set up an ad hoc committee which inquired into the state of the SABC. Right. And long story short, they found a lot of issues and made a lot of recommendations, and then dissolved the board on the back of that inquiry, brought in an interim board which was there for 6 months, and then we were appointed as a permanent board for 5 years. 12 of us came in. And that was October 2017. And I mean, it was something that I sort of consciously put up my hand for, because I thought, having spent 3 decades in the media in different roles, the private sector, the regulator, as a consultant, I just felt there was some value I could add as a non-executive director. And so I put up my hand and went through the process and was appointed. And we began a journey of trying to rebuild an organization which I believe should be a national treasure, has been a national treasure, but obviously fell on hard times for a number of reasons.
Right, and then and essentially, or almost immediately after you guys got there and started working, there was a little bit of a roadblock in terms of your independence, and you sort of had to navigate that. So what was that like?
I think it's very interesting when you're actually on a board and you have to steady a ship, and the only way you can steady a ship is to actually assert your independence, because we weren't just being independent for the sake of it. What some people may not realize is that on the day that we were appointed, so it was quite in a way, I see it as a lucky thing that happened. On that day, I think it was the 16th or 17th of October 2017, is the High Court came up with a decision. There was litigation between a civil society organization and the Minister of Communications, Faith Mutambi, where she had interfered with the previous boards and got involved in operational affairs. And the court came down very clearly on the side of independence and said, the board is the highest decision-making authority of the SABC. The board must appoint the top executive without interference. And that, most importantly, the minister was prevented and prohibited from getting involved or interfering in the board's work. Now, that was a decision that was right at the beginning. So in a lot of ways, it made it quite clear that we weren't just interpreting an independence that wasn't there. a court had said you do have that independence, and it also, I think, was good for the minister, because the minister came in and said, well, okay, now we know what our role is, we know what the board's role is. The board of the SABC has to account in a number of different ways. It accounts to Parliament, which is the body that has an oversight of it, but it also accounts to the minister in terms of a shareholder compact, in terms of basic reporting, because, you know, but one also accounts to the public in the main. You know, one must never forget that is your main accountability. So I think it helped clear the way for us to take decisions really without fear or favor. And that started a process which became a bit turbulent, because a lot of people haven't got used to this concept of an independent SABC board. It's not something that really was prevalent in the last couple of decades. And so we set about trying to assert that independence, not, as I say, for the sake of it, but because trust is the biggest thing in media, certainly in news media. And SABC, I think, there's no argument that had lost that public trust over the years. And I think, as someone who's involved in the media, you probably know better than most, is once you lose the trust, it's very difficult and painstaking to rebuild it.
To get it back.
That was the key thing. That was the key thing for the board and SABC News. I think has come a long way, because just to quickly go to that, is that the SABC covered 2 elections during the term of my board, of our board, which was 2019 and 2021. And both of those election coverage efforts were given the thumbs up by civil society, saying it's very balanced, very comprehensive, and there was no issue. Now, I'm not one of those guys who thinks that you must praise a fish for swimming. You know, you should be, you should be fair, you should be independent. But because of the history, obviously, we needed to show the audience that you can trust us again. We will give you an accurate and a balancing. And I think that was your first priority.
So now that we've summed up where we were with the SABC, I think let's move on from that and go to a point where you've left the SABC and you've penned a piece that I thought was very interesting, sort of summing up the state of play, but looking forward and addressing a couple of issues. A major part of that piece has to do with funding and how the SABC is funded. So I'd like to look at that and quiz you a little bit on, firstly, you know, this issue around funding of the SABC. It's a state-owned, essentially, broadcaster, but it only gets about 3% of its funding from government. Is it actually then a state-owned broadcaster if it only gets about 3% of its funding from government, and it requires almost 90% of its funding from advertising? Is it still a state-owned broadcaster, really, if that's the case?
Yeah, look, I think one has to differentiate the ownership from the funding. So the ownership, yes, it is a state-owned entity, as a SOE in the normal parlance of SOEs. It is state-owned. But we like to call it a public broadcaster, not a state broadcaster, because state broadcasters have a different kind of connotation where you're controlled by the state in terms of your output. So state-owned, but public-facing public broadcasters. So that's also part of
the reason why, prior to your board's appointment, there was that sort of in between where the state wanted to control the narrative, because essentially it is an SOE. But essentially, how do you then maintain independence and what's the word? My English starter bundles are running out. But how do you maintain independence and a non-biased reporting from an SOE? You know.
Look, as I said from the outset, the board plays almost what I call like an umbrella. So when the rain is pouring down on the SABC, the board's role is to keep it dry. Okay. Yeah. And what I mean by that is to create an enabling environment for editorial independence. And editorial independence, as I said, is absolutely critical to building that public trust, because there's no ways you can do it without that. And one of the first things we did, and I'll get onto the funding now, but one of the first things we did and started doing, and it was published in 2020, is SABC came up with new editorial policies. They're available on the website, and they really were widely praised at the time for entrenching the SABC's independence. So that's a key factor. Onto the funding, I think one of the challenges for the SABC is that it is one of the most commercially dependent public broadcasts on the planet. I've looked at it, I've done the research. SABC with about over 80% commercial revenue, so that's advertising, that's sponsorship, that's carriage fees from channels. 80% of the revenue comes from commercial sources. Then you've got 60% from license fees, and just over 3% from direct government grants. So direct government funding, if you take away license fees, you correctly said is 3%.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to talk about sport, which is a huge public mandate obligation of the SEC. Sport is not a commercially driven mandate. Yes, it's good to make money out of it, but like other mandates, it costs money. Now, SABC had to look at how do we change the current situation, because what we can already see is advertising revenues are under pressure across the board in the industry.
Right.
You've got dominant platforms like your Google and your Facebooks eating up 70 to 80% of digital advertising revenues. And so how do we solve the problem of an SABC that's so dependent on advertising, that has this big public mandate? And so the thing that we did, and SABC put this in writing and submissions to government, is we need to first look at the broken TV license system. It is a broken system. Why is it broken? Because first of all, it's called TV license. Okay. Now we all know that the way people consume SABC's content is on a number of platforms. It's not just over TV. SABC is the second biggest online news source in the country after News 24. A lot of people don't realize it. They think, SABC, old-fashioned, just a TV, radio. No, SABC is online, the second biggest news source. Secondly, it's also 30 million people access it on radio every day. So to have something called a TV license, linking the license to a piece of technology, is outdated, it's archaic, and we said that must be changed. But where SABC was coming from the point of view was, if you already have a direct levy in law that exists, if the levy has a problem in the way it's defined and collected, fix it. Don't scrap it. Now, there are many people out there say, scrap it, we don't watch it. And I understand that. Most people around the world will not want to pay a levy if they don't have to. But what SABC did is made the link between a stable, well-funded SABC and constitutional democracy. That having an independent funded public broadcaster around the world, we've seen that the better funded a public broadcaster is, the better the democratic health of a country. So we came at it from the point of view is, yes, some people may not watch it, but they've got the possibility of accessing it. And that access is key. So we propose changing that TV license fee to a public media household levy, which would exempt the indigent. And we suggested and recommended that MultiChoice be involved in assisting the SABC in collecting that levy. And that I've also subsequently proposed, it's not the SABC, is that be extended to streaming platforms. Now, of course, that proposal got rejected, obviously, publicly by MultiChoice. I was surprised about that. And a lot of the public sort of thought that, this is some kind of crazy South African exceptionalism. We're doing crazy things. No one's ever done it around the world. But it's not strictly speaking true. If you look at what's happening in Europe, there's something called the Netflix tax that a lot of European countries are looking at to assist funding of European content and public interest programming. So the point that we were making is that what we're proposing is light or soft in comparison, because you're not saying MultiChoice must subsidize the SABC. We're saying MultiChoice should assist in the collection of that license fee.
So essentially, So essentially, you're saying that, okay, fine. The definition right now, the wording is problematic because it speaks to one sort of technology. Okay, cool. I
Yeah.
get that. I don't have a problem with that. What you're saying is that there must be a public media levy which uses possibly other players to help the SABC to collect revenue, um, just because people have access to it. And because the public, the general public have access to it for free, they must then also subsidize those who don't have access to pay TV platforms and require or rely on the SABC for information generally, right? So that's a simple layman's
It's a
terms
good,
understanding
it's
of
a good
what you're
summary.
saying. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good summary.
Now, knowing the state of this country with things like e-tolls and people's general um, you know position with regards to these mandated fees. Do you think that the reason why it was sort of rejected is because of the fact that people generally don't like to pay for stuff that they don't regularly access or use? But also at the same time, we obviously need to juxtapose that against the fact that you have a huge population of people who require the service. You know,
Yeah.
the public,
Yeah.
the listed companies and entities aren't providing the type of service that the SABC can provide. That's a simple fact.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how do you balance the two?
Look, the thing is, it's always going to be difficult to convince people who don't use something that they have an interest in paying for it. But to a large extent, that's how kind of progressive tax works around the world, is that people that have some more money are effectively subsidizing services for the less fortunate or the disadvantaged, or even if you could say the precariously poor. Because if you look at a lot of the SABC's audience and a large amount of them who are potentially going to be switched off with this analog switch off, where we're switching off transmitters, SABC needs to be in a position to be able to fulfill its public mandate. Now, all we're saying is that, think of it like this, right? When you buy an airline ticket, okay, you'll see airport taxes at the bottom. You don't have a choice. In order to buy your airline ticket, you've got to pay the airport taxes are part of that fee.
Right.
Similarly, when you stay in a hotel, there's a tourism levy at the bottom. Okay.
Right.
You may never use the facilities that tourism levy goes to, but
you're still,
because you're using something in the tourism space, you partially subsidizing.
Right.
I don't see this as that much different.
Perhaps.
You are consuming something. Really, what we're saying, and this is really what, when I say we, it's still a force. Because when you've been somewhere for 5 years, it's still we. But really, the idea was just to say it needs to be a law to make it happen, because obviously the pay TV operators and the streaming platforms won't do it voluntarily. And I don't think personally, and the SABC hasn't taken this position, is that they could even charge a collection fee for the use of their payment mechanisms. Because you're saying, look, I've got efficient payment mechanisms. They're subscription plans. All one is saying, and when you look at it, how much are you asking for? 265 Rand a year is 72 cents a day. I know that there are people who pay people to park, look after their cars more than that in the street. You know, so what we're asking is people who already are able to afford Netflix, who are able to afford multi-choice, it's just to make that little contribution to keeping the public broadcast alive. Because in the end, the public broadcasting is something that when you don't have it, people will regret it. Because I've been asked this question by many people, but can't the private sector provide? Why do we need the SABC? And I think very clearly is that there are a number of services provided by the SABC that the private sector will never provide, because it's not commercially viable. Language services in particular, most of the private sector in radio is in English.
Yeah, but I'll be honest with you from the outset. I didn't support it at the beginning because perhaps the issue is the communication around the rationale wasn't what you're saying to me. The communication, as far as I heard it, was, we're going to charge you for watching TV. and there wasn't communication to say, listen, we have this portion of society that can't access this. We would like to use these guys, like MultiChoice and these other service providers, to collect on our behalf so that we can fund this public, this public platform, which is essentially for the public good, and allow for the rest of society to be able to access content, right? So on the back of this conversation, I'm converted. I understand what it's like, but I think that the state broadcaster can communicate better. Anyway, that's besides the point.
I don't debate that for 1 second, and I do think that, when you're introducing new policy, I mean, one thing you've got to realize, and when you look at it, the last time the SABC's founding law, which is called the Broadcasting Act of 1999, the last time that was amended was in 1999. That is 23 years ago. You, as someone who's involved in media and digital and sport, think about the changes in the media industry since 1999. I mean, they seismic. They're like earthquakes have hit the media industry in the last 20 years. Yet the SABC's founding law, including that license fee, has remained unchanged for over 2 decades. So all SABC was asking was to say that license fee levy needs to be updated to take into account modern needs, modern demands, and also to look at giving certain players in the private sector some public obligations as well in the public interest. So look, that's still got a way to go. I mean, government is in charge of the policy. So that was a proposal made by the SABC. But, as far as we're concerned, at the time, something had to change. And even if that is not the outcome, something has to change from being 80% commercially funded. And we thought the one line of the income statement that could be increased is license fees. If you can move that from currently it's about 800 million that was collected last year, if you could double that to 2 billion, right? A year. And I think with improved collections, and just to make it clear, one's not saying the SABC is absolved from collecting itself. No. We're just saying, to collect from those that haven't currently paid, that's the mechanism that we take. But SABC must attempt to collect itself on its new online platforms, which we can talk about as well. But at the end of the day, we've got to change the funding model so that the dependence on advertising is not as great as it currently is.
Okay, so dependence on advertising needs to reduce because globally advertising revenue is reducing anyway. Government needs to increase its allocation of spend because it's at 3%. It's nowhere near high enough. And if you look at globally, the global state of play is that states generally provide a lot more than 3%, and then also possibly implement a levy with the help of other players to help to finance the SABC. Great. Now we can move into sport. Because part of the reason why the SABC hasn't been able to broadcast sport is because just because the SABC is a free-to-air broadcaster, it doesn't mean that the rights are free for them to broadcast. They have to pay for them, right? And I think a lot of people don't get that. The fact that rights are expensive, they have to be paid for regardless of whether they're free to air or not. And for the SABC to sub-license them from someone, they still have to pay.
That's correct. That's correct. Look, I think that one of the things that I think we've made some progress on under the previous head of sport, Gary Rathbone, who I think did a lot before he moved on to pursue his own endeavors. But he made a huge amount of progress, firstly, to sort of position SABC Sport differently. Launching an SABC Sport channel was critical in this. And I believe, and I know Gary shares this view, is that free sport, when I say free sport, not the rights, I mean free sport to the customer, to the consumer, is probably the only potential competitive force to pay sport, because there's unlikely to be another pay TV competitor in this country. There is pretty much one player. If you exclude your streamers, there's one player that's really involved in sport in this country. So
Right.
getting SABC Sport up and running and getting it on as many platforms as possible to get it out there is absolutely critical, because we believe that South Africans have been starved of free sport and compelling free sport.
Right.
And so the journey began to say, well, how can we properly monetize, improve this channel? And then we got to the discussion of rights. As you correctly said, rights is very expensive. But we raised other issues that were going on in the industry at the time. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when the SABC signed the PSL deal, it was right at the beginning of our board term.
Right.
Is at that stage, there was no separate channel, there was no streaming platform for the SABC. And the conditions that MultiChoice put in that PSL agreement was that SABC had to firstly sub-license the rights from MultiChoice. So
Right.
I'm sure your audience will know is that means that MultiChoice bought all the rights.
Yeah.
And then SABC had to come to MultiChoice and do an agreement to sub-license those rights from MultiChoice.
Yeah, and I'd like to just before we continue, I'd like to just paint this picture actually, because it's important. The PSL signed an exclusive agreement with MultiChoice, where essentially the agreement
is SuperSport to be
accurate. With SuperSport to be accurate.
Yeah.
The exclusive agreement essentially stated that, and this is essentially the same for rugby and cricket. So you could take this exact same picture and put it across to rugby and cricket, which is why you're not seeing rugby and cricket on television, by the way. So they signed an exclusive agreement, and then for the SABC to get those rights, the SABC then has to go to SuperSport and negotiate a sub-license fee, which SuperSport then has conditions on in terms of where that content is able to be broadcast by the SABC, which is what you're talking about now, right?
Exactly. Now I think that so really the issue the SABC started having was those conditions. SABC was prepared to pay the price for the rights, but in the PSL agreement, it had no choice at the time because it didn't have SABC Sport. It unfortunately had to agree to certain restrictive conditions to get those rights. And what are those restrictive conditions? That PSL games could not be shown on any platform that was not an SABC platform, could not be shown on any channel other than SABC 1, 2, and 3 that cuts out SABC Sport, and could not be shown on any platform that was not terrestrial television. So what I mean by that, i.e., it would exclude satellite, and it would exclude TV. So they're saying you can have the rights, but you can't show it on your own sports channel, you can't show it on streaming, and you can't show it on a satellite platform. Okay, so SABC had to agree to that with regard to the PSL because it didn't have many other options at the time, and it decided to live to fight another day. Right. But unfortunately, when it went to try and negotiate the rugby rights with SuperSport, and that was the British Lions tour in particular, SuperSport tried to impose those similar conditions that it did for the PSL on the SABC, and the SABC put its foot down then. It said, right, so far, no further. Wrote to SuperSport and said, we believe that these conditions are anti-competitive because SABC, once buying these rights, should be able to deploy them on any SABC channel, no matter where that platform is, no matter what platform it's on. And we felt that that was irrelevant and that we should be allowed to deploy those rights free to air, whether that's streaming, satellite, or terrestrial.
But there's a problem, Mike, because while the SABC may be of the view that this content is of national interest and it should be on a public broadcaster, the rights holders, which is the sporting leagues and sporting bodies, when they were approached by ICASA, when ICASA was inquiring on the fairness of these agreements and so on, they went to ICASA and said, well, we need this money. And the only way we can get this much money is through these exclusive agreements that we've signed. So essentially, they support the status quo.
Well, of course they would, and that's a separate issue which I can come to right now. What is the current situation in South Africa? It is very different to how it's done in Europe. And I'm using Europe because Europe, I think, is the most evolved sports market in the world in terms of fairness. And what happened in Europe quite a few years ago is Europe, the European Commission, who deals with the competition issues there, said this concept of a single buyer of all rights was outlawed. Okay.
Right.
And it also firstly found, and this might be interesting to some of the viewers, that sports bodies are like cartels. What is a cartel? A cartel is a group of people who band together to collectively sell rights and collude in the pricing of those rights.
Right.
Now, that is kind of unlawful behavior in any competition law, but it's kind of been accepted as the practice because obviously it's easier for sports bodies to come together and sell their rights for the games, and each club doing it individually. So it's understood that that's sort of the way it's done. But what the Europeans said, we'll exempt you from being a cartel. However, these are the conditions. You cannot sell it to just one buyer. You have to break it up. You have to unbundle the rights. And now you'll see with the Premier League in the UK, it used to be on Sky Sports, similar to the multi-choice subject. That is no longer the case. It's on BT. It's on a number of different sports. Amazon, even the streamers have got involved. So what the Europeans said is, we understand that you guys need to collectively sell your rights, but that actually falls foul of competition law because it's a cartel. We'll exempt you on these conditions. Now, what SABC felt was that the PSL was selling to one party all the rights, including rights that that party couldn't deploy because multi-choice is not
free to air. Yeah.
Okay. So it effectively got all the rights. And then SABC, instead of going directly to PSL for free to air, had to go via multi-choice. Okay, that's fine. What we had asked ICASA to do at the time when I was at the SABC was to come in with fair criteria to govern the sub-licensing, so that sub-licensing was done on a fair basis. We had asked the regulator to unbundle the rights to make sure that the sports body, and I'm not just looking at the PSL, any sports body could not sell all the rights to just one player, which is the standard practice overseas in Europe. Unfortunately, ICASA did not do that. They did not deal with SABC's request. So SABC, as was publicly reported, has submitted a complaint to the Competition Commission.
To the Competition Commission,
where it said that these conditions for multi-choice are anti-competitive and prevent the SABC from growing SABC Sport Channel. Because
why did the SABC not go to perhaps the Constitutional Court or whomever else? Because essentially, if it's anti-competitive, it should be illegal. You could set a.
You've got to go via the competition. You've got to go if it's a competition-related issue.
So essentially, this is why it's now gone to the Competition Commission, so that the Competition Commission can rule on the legality of pay TV broadcasters being able to also hold non-pay TV or free-to-air rights at the same time as holding pay TV rights, which essentially leaves free-to-air broadcasters beholden on them for those rights.
Yeah, I think the main area of the complaint was the restrictive condition.
Yes.
Where those rights could be deployed. Yes, your point is right in terms of the bigger point, but the key rationale for the complaint was the restrictive conditions placed on SABC to say that SABC could not even deploy those rights on its own sports channel, which kind of shows you, and you could put it to multi-choice, is if they're seeing that SABC Sport is not a threat, and that they're so dominant, why are they trying to inhibit the growth of SABC Sport? Why do they want to restrict SABC Sport's rights to be on a streaming platform and a whole bunch of other things? Because maybe it is seen as a potential threat. And when I say threat, I don't mean to say SABC Sport could ever come close to SuperSport, which is a fantastic business. Don't get me wrong. I think that they've built a fantastic business there. But sometimes when someone gets so big, they forget, that certain rules have to be adhered to, and the rules of fair competition is key.
Yeah.
There's no debate that multi-choice and SuperSport are the dominant players in sports broadcasting, and therefore they have an extra duty to behave fairly when they're so big with potential competitors. So that's where we're coming from.
It'll be interesting in the long term, in any case, regardless of this outcome, to see what they decide. Because at the end of the day, you still need a free-to-air broadcast. If you want sport to grow, if you want women's football to grow, for instance, you need people to be watching these games. And if we've got, I mean, so much youth unemployment and so on and so on, if we've got so many people unable to afford pay TV, we need the public broadcaster to be able to be broadcasting these games for them to see them. So it'll be very interesting to see what the competition commission will do with this decision around, you know, whether to force an unbundling of these rights, because essentially it is a situation where, you know, you essentially have to go to one player to get both free to air and pay TV rights, which, yeah, it's a bit problematic. But there's and just today, the SABC Plus app has been launched, which essentially takes the almost entire SABC catalog and brings it online. It's now an over-the-top platform where people can download on their phones. There's a partnership with Hisense, so people can download the app on a Hisense TV. But does that change the state of play with regards to people being able to watch PSL games or SA rugby games or cricket games? What happens with that?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very good point. And just firstly, let me just say congratulations to the SABC for launching that streaming platform today. I think it's a long time in coming, and it's a really exciting development, because I think it's the future of the SABC. We're having every single piece of SABC content on one app, in one place, and it's also quite exciting from an archive point of view. So I just wanted to say that from the outset is congratulations to management for launching this. The streaming strategy has been there for quite a few years, but we just weren't able to get to this before the end of our board term, and I'm very glad that this is done. On your question on the issue of anti-competitive action, if, for example, someone wants to watch a PSL game on SABC, they can only watch that PSL game on SABC One on analog, your normal bunny ears TV, or SABC One on DTT, which is digital terrestrial. DTT is a very small platform. There's only currently maybe about 800,000 to 900,000 homes there. So SABC, you would not be able, because of the restrictions in the PSL agreement, SABC cannot show PSL games on this new app, whether it's on SABC Sport or SABC One. It cannot show PSL games on SABC One when you're watching it on the OpenView. So essentially, the restrictions placed on the PSL agreement is that you can not show it on any platform that is satellite or streaming, or that is owned by another third party. Okay, like OpenView.
Like OpenView, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But really, the restriction was about platforms, and it's saying it wasn't just about ownership, but it was about you can only do it on these terrestrial platforms. Now, the terrestrial platforms, once you switch off analog, are the smallest platforms. You know, SABC did the platform deal with OpenView because it didn't want to be dependent on just one platform. And I think it was a smart deal to do. Now, today has come out with its own streaming platform, which is incredibly exciting. And it will be great for the World Cup, because all the games SABC is showing for free will be on there. But when it comes to rights that have been sub-licensed, like the PSL, you will not be able to watch PSL games on that app via the SABC, okay, in terms of the current agreement. And that is a major inhibitor. That is an inhibitor.
Let's just repeat that again. You cannot watch any PSL games or sub-licensed sport on a platform that is not your old school bunny aerial TV or a DTT enabled or terrestrial enabled device, which, I mean, almost nobody has a DTT device. So essentially, you can't watch it anyway. I mean, unless you have your old DTT device or your old, bunny aerial TV or DTT device, You can't watch it on the app. You can't watch it on SABC One. You can't watch it on OpenView. Can't watch it on SABC Sport on the app. You can't watch it on SABC Sport. Period. Anywhere.
Yeah. So we're talking specifically about the PSL. Obviously, also any rights that SABC gets directly from sports bodies that are not sub-licensed from MultiChoice,
they will be able to
can be
broadcast
shown on the app and shown anywhere. And that's the aim. The aim is to turn SABC Sport into your go-to place for accessing all these great sporting events.
Right.
But the thing is that's why we hit that deadlock, because at the time they wanted to impose the same restrictions on rugby.
Right.
And the thought was, if you're going to spend a fortune for these rights, you should be able to deploy them on whatever platform you want. We want people to now get access to the platforms where, if you look at it, what is the biggest TV platform in the country? Satellite.
Yeah.
You've got, if you look at MultiChoice and OpenView together, you've got probably good over 10, 11 million households that are using satellite to receive television. Your next biggest is your analog TV, which is about to be switched off. And that's about 5 or 6 million. Okay. So that's going to be switched. Your next biggest is your DTT, which is about 800,000 to 900,000 homes. I haven't seen the latest figures. Maybe it's gone to 1 million, but it's still the smallest, right?
Right.
And then, of course, streaming is still a smaller platform, but it's not TV. That is over the top. It's online consumption. So I'm just looking at the TV market. Satellite is the predominant reception in the country. But effectively, the PSL sub-licensing agreement says is that the SABC cannot deploy it on satellite, okay?
Right.
On someone else's satellite platform, okay? So that already restricts SABC significantly. And then it says you can't do it on a streaming platform, okay?
Yeah.
So if I think if people are objective and they want to look at, do they think that is fair? And on any objective basis, it cannot be seen to be fair, particularly if SABC is prepared to pay the money. It's not about money.
Yeah, but then there's more than two players involved here. One, there's the rights holder who agrees to the broadcast agreement, because the PSL has a question to answer then in terms of why they signed the agreement, knowing the fact that most of the general public who don't have access to pay TV won't be able to watch the games. Two, there's the regulator who essentially allow the status quo to continue to happen. And then three is the broadcasters in terms of what their priorities are for the consumption of sport and the growth of sport and the health of sport. Because at the end of the day, the broadcasters still need to serve the general public. The broadcasters won't survive if the general public don't want to watch sport. And if the kids nowadays who are 5 years old don't ever get to watch sport, we can't expect to have fans 20 years down the line. So there has to be a fine balance met here. And somewhere, somehow, we need to come to a balance that works for everyone and ensures that sport is able to grow. But at the present moment, we're not there.
And I think that, ultimately, to be fair to the guys at SuperSport and MultiChoice, they got the rights from the PSL. You're absolutely correct. The PSL agreement between them and MultiChoice is the one that effectively gave
rise to the situation.
The right to be able to impose those conditions. And I think that, unfortunately, sometimes when stuff goes wrong in a market, like this is essentially a market-related issue, that is why we have regulators. Regulators are there, like the Competition Commission, to ensure fair competition. And where there's a failure in the market to do that, a regulator has to step in. Now, obviously, the matters before the Competition Commission, they will then independently investigate a complaint. So it's lodged as a formal complaint. They then investigate it. They'll get the other side. I'm sure MultiChoice has their side of the story, to be fair, and they'll put their side of the story. And then obviously the regulator has to make a decision as to how they will rule. One would hope that the regulator would look at the precedent of how the Europeans have handled it, where they've said, you know, you can be a collective selling organization and a cartel on the condition that you don't sell it to just one player, that you unbundle.
Right.
And I think that's really where the SABC is looking for, and looking for there to be no restrictions on the platforms that the SABC can deploy the rights on. And I think then we can start thinking about the SABC becoming a real stronger player in sports broadcasting in South Africa, which I think is in the public interest.
Right. No, absolutely. Michael, from the outside looking in and understanding now, what it was like, and a wider view. Wow, thank you so much for the insight. I think you've really helped myself and the audience to get a really good understanding of the big picture of what's going on, because it's very easy to get drawn into the minutia of, I can't watch a game, but there's a lot more going on in the background than meets the eye. And there's a lot hanging on this decision from the Competition Commission, because it could fundamentally change the entire landscape of sport in this country, not just for football, but for other sports in general. Because as you said, there is one big gorilla in the room who has essentially almost all the rights. And if the SABC is able to compete, which they've tried to before, from what you're saying, on an even footing in terms of money, it will fundamentally change how things are, and fundamentally change the future of sport in this country. So, Mr. Michael Markovitz, Professor Michael Markovitz, if I could call you that.
Not a professor. Maybe in the soccer nickname pantheon, I could be a professor, but I'm not a professor.
No, my good friend Michael Markovitz, thank you so much for coming on and having a discussion with us. Now we hope your face won't age as quickly as it did with the SABC, because it's a tough space to be. But thank you so much for your time, and
thanks so much.
Yeah, I wish you all the best at GIBS, and I'm looking forward to the work that you guys do across the continent, because I know that it is. And perhaps before you go, can you just tell us what you're doing at GIBS, and the plans ahead for the continent?
Okay. Well, look, the GIBS Media Leadership Think Tank is essentially a research and advocacy platform that I've set up within the Gordon Institute of Business Science, which is really the University of Pretoria's business school. And we are just getting going at the moment, but the whole idea is to focus on those issues that impact on democracy in relation to the media. And the main issues really are something we've already talked about, the sustainability of the media, because it's not just public media, but I think you've seen that all of media has been under threat, and even some of the online media publishers have made complaints about the Googles and the Facebook's domination of advertising. So you've got, number one, media sustainability. Number two, you've got the concept of the issue of mis and disinformation directly potential to impact democracy, looking at research on that. The third thing is the competition in the digital economy. We've talked a bit about that today as well. And then an issue that really more affects on the continent than on South Africa is the concept is the problem of internet shutdowns. We've got a number of what is called digital authoritarians who are just shutting down the internet in their countries when there is elections or protests. So we are looking to build relations with research institutes and advocacy platforms across the continent, West Africa and East Africa in particular, to start building what one could call an African knowledge base in this area, because a lot of the knowledge that we rely on for these types of issues comes from think tanks in the global north. And what we want to build in Africa is our own research, our own solutions that could help solve these issues, which are very difficult issues to solve. So that's really what we're doing, and that's really what we hope to achieve in the short to medium term.
No, absolutely, Michael. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best. I'm very confident that you'll come up with some incredible work, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of GIBS and your team there. And yeah, Mike, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers, Mike.